on this, especially this week. Last week was bad enough, but I decided to do it before anything ever came down the pike to teach on this. And then between that last week and this week, this really has some life lesson to it for us right now, and that's on civil disobedience. And some would say that we are in civil disobedience right now. And let's see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We're under 10 in the auditorium. We are practicing the 6-foot rule between families. There is sanitizer back there that actually kills the viruses, because we researched that and found one that actually does. A lot of them don't. They just kind of smear it around on your hands. We haven't been handshaking really probably since early December. So we've been practicing a lot of this before the coronavirus ever showed up, and we're not trying to be in civil disobedience. And there's nothing there's no word from the governor that we're to shut down religious services yet. If they were to, because it's concerning this virus, and I understand what they're trying to do, we would adhere to it. We're not going to adhere to some type of permanent thing until further notice, but as long as it matters where this, I know what they're trying to do. Instead of this big curve, they're trying to get this one. I understand that. And we'll do our best to do that. But we're practicing the rules that they said for people getting together anyway. And you know that you've got people going to the grocery stores, going to all kinds of stuff. I went to Lowe's last night to pick up some things, and they were packed. I mean, there's more cars in the parking lot than normal. And we're talking about on a Saturday afternoon, there was cars out in the parking lot that I don't normally see there, or as far as the number. So folks are still getting together, but hopefully they're practicing good hygiene, and that's really what this is about. Wash your hands, keep your distance, and if you don't have to go anywhere, the best thing is don't. We've also asked our elderly to just stay home and wait this thing out, because the last thing we want to do is to give it to someone and cause them health problems or even death. We don't want to be responsible for that, and we don't want to do that. So I've talked to some individuals. Now, if they want to show up and they're determined to show up, I'm not going to lock them out either. But just do your best not to be the one to spread this thing around if you get it, and there's a possibility that one of us will get it. If you do get it, let me know. Okay? Because that could change everything. I don't think, does anybody know, I don't think there's still even a case in Greene County yet. Is there one? There's one now. Okay. Right, Pat? Okay. Well, how could it come in from anywhere? So, but I mean, up until, just yesterday, there was not even one case in Greene County that's been documented. That doesn't mean they're not walking around. As I understand it, the Chinese were allowed to fly in about 10,000 a day from the very place where it started, and just kind of wander around. Makes you kind of wonder if that wasn't an intentional thing there. So, but anyway, we were talking about civil disobedience, and what we found out was that it's never okay to disobey, and that is, it's never okay to disobey God. If obeying God means you're not obeying somebody else, that's perfectly all right, as long as you're obeying God. Now, you got to make sure you're right about that thing, though. I know some Christians get it in their mind that, whatever they think is right, that must be what God wants. Well, you better make sure you got Scripture to back that up. We talked about the Hebrew midwives over in the book of Exodus, and I'm not going to revisit all these passages, but I want to talk about them briefly, where Pharaoh gave an order that if there was a male child, a male Hebrew child, they were to kill it. If it's female, they were to let it live. And the midwives, the Hebrew midwives, weren't going to do that. First of all, they feared God. And they lied to Pharaoh about it. When he asked him, he said, how come I don't see any dead male babies here? And they said, because the Hebrew women are very lively, and when they deliver, man, I mean, it's boom. We get there, and not only is the baby gone, the woman's gone. I mean, what can we do? Well, they lied to save life. And, I think of that. I think of the passage where it says, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. We talked about that a little bit. Well, would you bear false witness to save your neighbor? I mean, think about that a second. And any of us in this room, I don't care how, I don't care how Baptist you are, when it came right down to it to save your children, your husband, your wife, your life, and I'm talking about in a righteous thing, you'd lie out your teeth. And so would I. Now, they may not buy it, but I'd lie. I'm not going to tell them, where I'm hiding my wife. If they're looking for my wife and they're trying to do her harm, I'm not, hey, she's hiding back there. I cannot tell a lie. I wouldn't do that. But it all has to do in obedience to God first. And then if that means there's disobedience to a lower power, that's their problem. Now, I'm going to say this. They'll make it your problem. So, the last one we looked at, well, let me go through these real quick. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow to an idol. They got thrown into a fiery furnace. Now, they really, Holy Ghost must have been on them. Man, they were bold and everything. They said, listen, we're not bound to you, king, no matter what. If God doesn't deliver us, fine. We'll just be crispy critters. And they threw them in the fiery furnace. Of course, God did deliver them. But evidently, it doesn't matter whether He delivers them or not, they weren't going to disobey God. And the other one we looked at was Daniel, refused to give up prayer to God, and he got thrown into the lion's den. All of these are disobedience to government. And he didn't have to lie about it. He just boldly refused to shut down prayer. In fact, he made it clear that he wasn't going to. He made a statement about it. And the world doesn't like that, They want you to kowtow, and they'll give all kind of reasons. I am sure that if we were to open up comments on our YouTube, we'd be condemned for having service here this morning. Yet they'll make any excuse to do what they want to do. That's what I've seen. The Bible says they either accuse or excuse themselves. They can accuse you, and then by accusing you, they can excuse themselves. That's usually how it works. Rahab, when she hid the spies, had to lie to the authorities that she even saw them. Oh, she said, I saw them go that way. and she was hiding them. There's no way it was an out and out lie. But it was a lie to protect life. It was a lie because she knew the true God was the God of the Hebrews. And she did not want to get on the bad side of that God. That's a smart thing to do. The last thing you want to do is get on the wrong side of God, even if it means to obey the authorities. God established power, and usually, Romans 13, you got to understand, is when things are the way they're supposed to be. When they're the way they're supposed to be, then they're a terror to evil works, not to good works. They establish parameters to keep a society at peace with itself. The only reason you got to have all these rules about whether you can build a doghouse, how big it could be, and did you have a design to submit? No, I'm serious. All this stuff they want now is because we're joined together to where we can't live at peace with one another. The Bible says, woe unto them that join house to house, that there be no room in the earth. The last thing you want is just be bunched up with a bunch of people. You are not going to get along. I got one a half a mile away. I couldn't get along with her. I'm just telling you, it's just hard to get along when you're just bunched up together. And then everybody's in your business. They're in the business about what you put up, how you paint your house, kind of fence you put up. And then you got people that just refuse to be right about the thing. When you put up a fence, the most unsightly side of it is supposed to face you. Did you know that? Because if you love your neighbor, you wouldn't put the ugly side toward them. You do know that, right? You don't know how many fences I've seen where the ugly side's pointed toward the neighbor's house. By the way, it's code that you have that side facing you because you're the one that wants the fence. So at least make the pretty side face your neighbor. That does make sense. You shouldn't have to have a law. You shouldn't have to have a code. You should automatically do that. A lot of it's just common sense. But then when they start regulating things, they get to the point where it about drives you crazy. You can't do anything without somebody overseeing what you're doing and criticizing what you're doing. And then it's subject to a lot of objectivity. And that'll really make you crazy. But the more people we get and the closer we get together, the more laws we're going to have. That's all there is to it. And Congress is determined to pass so many laws that, well, you won't know if you're on the right side of it or not. You couldn't possibly know whether you're on the right side of things. But here's what I noticed the last couple of days. I'll get to this. Here's what I noticed the last couple of days. Maybe you noticed this. That whenever they needed to bypass a law, whenever they needed to suspend a law, they just did it. Oh, we're suspending this. Oh, you don't have to submit your taxes till July 15th now. But any other year, man, they're hauling you off to jail, or they're writing you a threatening letter, or they're getting ready to freeze your accounts. But boy, when this comes along, well, we're just going to extend it over here. I mean, it's just like they just, boom, instantly, they can change everything. Got to be careful about government that can suspend laws and then turn around and maybe suspend your rights. That's when you got to be concerned. So Rahab lied to the authorities, and what did God do? God saved her. He built the midwives houses. He provided for them. God's blessing these people, not for disobeying authority. No, for obeying Him, for considering Him. Listen, life, everything, it's about God. It's about God. It's not about government. It's not about Trump. It's not about Congress. It's not about the United States. It's about God. And if you don't ever keep God in the forefront of that thing, you are going to go the wrong direction eventually. This thing can go sour in a day. It's already gone sour if you haven't already seen it. Where it's going to go, listen, don't worry about the virus. There is so much more going on and so much more that could happen. I keep thinking, well, I wonder if this is it. And then I'm thinking, well, if this ain't it, what is? I mean, listen, this whole world wants to reset. They're going to reset because the Antichrist is going to be coming to a world that's in absolute turmoil. Do you realize how close we are to that turmoil? By the actions that were just taken by the world, not just the United States. If it flops over on its side, there'll be pandemonium worldwide. We might be looking at the rapture by spring. That's good. I'm good with it. As they say, bring it on. I don't want to be here, but bring it on. I'm not going to be here. Not for that. But if things did get tough, I'm just telling you that they're wanting to reset it, the whole system, because it's failing. It's been failing for about 40 years. Anyway, I've talked enough about that. People get weary of me talking about it. I've been saying it for 10 or 12, 15 years. I don't know how long. And it's going to happen because it's happened to everybody else before us. History dictates it will happen. And it's going to happen to us. It's just when and how, where are we going to be at, what kind of situation we're going to be in. It's kind of interesting, though, that everybody was in. I talked about them being all in. And everybody was all in up to their necks. You realize that this is all about debt. The economy's not in good shape. It's just got so much debt now. That's what perked it up. People were borrowing again. It's not that there's wealth there so much as they was just borrowing. And that's where we're at. You'll see. Give it a couple months, then you'll see the ramifications of this. Now, if it snaps back, great. Do you think it could handle another round of this in the fall? Because that's what they're thinking will happen. If it does go away for a while, it'll come right back in the fall. What are they going to do, shut down the economy again in the fall? How long are we going to be shut down now? 6 weeks is what they're talking. 6 weeks. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. They'll figure out. Okay. I'm going to go move on. I'm about to get into conspiracy theory stuff again. I can't help it. My mind just goes that way. We looked at Acts chapter 5 where we talked about Peter and John were witnessing and preaching on the street, and they were threatened by the authorities. And I think they end up getting a beating out of this. And see, I can't promise you for obeying God that everything will work out. No, you might get a beating for it, but man, that's one beating you won't regret. You know, there's a lot of beatings in life you probably get because you deserve it, but for getting one for God, that's the kind of beating you want, if you're going to get one. And they threatened them, but they said, what did they say? We ought to obey God rather than man. That's what this is about. In other words, there's no such thing as disobedience. There's only obedience. But when the highest power, which is God Almighty, and the powers that are underneath don't align up, obey the higher power. And let the chips fall where they may, right down here. Always. Listen, it's better to have God on your side than any of these governments. I'd rather have God backing me up. So that's why it's important. So let's look at the next one. Turn to 1 Samuel chapter 14. 1 Samuel chapter 14. And I can get past some of this. Verse 43 to 45. And let me give you a little fill in of what's happened. This is where Jonathan is fighting, and I think he's fighting the Philistines. I can't remember, but anyway, he's involved in battle, and he's out there with all of his company. And Saul makes this stupid thing about having a fast, that no man can eat anything for a certain amount of time. Well, you know, when you've got men in battle, the last thing you want to do is deny them calories. You know what they say about an army? It travels on its... You don't give them calories, man, they'll faint in the way because, you know, they're probably burning up 5,000 to 6,000 calories a day. They're marching, they're fighting, the anxiety, the adrenaline, everything that a soldier needs. He needs sustenance, he needs food. So what does Saul do? He says, we're going to have a fast. Well, his own son, Jonathan, you know, he's traveling under this tree. There's this honeycomb or this hive, I guess, and there's honey dripping down. Well, it drips onto his hand or something or other, or something, and he tastes it, and his eyes just go blink. One thing about honey doesn't need to be digested. It's already been digested by bees. So when you take honey in, it's instant energy. Kind of remember that. If you want to go camping or whatever, or you need some fast energy, a little bit of honey. Now, don't give it to children. There's a certain amount of... certain age, you don't give it to children because of there could be botulism or something, some type of, I don't know, what is it? Botulism, thank you. Yeah, but still, I mean, you know, I've always got to have that, you know, the Surgeon General, you know. I probably haven't said enough about how we're protecting the church yet. But anyway, so he takes this honey. Well, wow, man. You know, he's under a death penalty now from his own dad. And Saul's so crazy, he's going to put him to death. Well, look what happens here in verse 43 to 45. It says there, then Saul said to Jonathan, tell me what thou hast done. And Jonathan told him and said, I did but taste a little honey with the end of the rod that was in mine hand, and lo, I must die. And Saul answered, God do so and more also, for thou shalt surely die, Jonathan. I ain't nothing like a loving dad, you know. Thanks, Dad. Look at this. And the people said unto Saul, shall Jonathan die, who hath wrought this great salvation in Israel? Because he won a great battle. God forbid, as the Lord liveth, there shall not one hair of his head fall to the ground, for he hath wrought with God this day. So the people rescued Jonathan, that he died not. I'm affirming that these are the fellow soldiers that he's with. They rescued him. They disobeyed capital punishment from the highest authority in the land. You say, why? Because it was right. It was right. So sometimes those things happen. More times than not, you're just under the gun to obey the authorities that be. That's just how it is. Whether you like it or not, you're under it. And listen, if you violate it. You know, when you're going down the highway and it says 65 and you're doing 85 and you get pulled over, do not give that man a hard time. You broke the law. and now you're going to pay the penalty. That's how the thing works. You broke the law, you pay. He said, well, I don't believe in income tax, therefore I'm not going to pay my taxes. You'll go to jail. I can't tell you how many Christians have been caught in that trap where it's like, it's been put this way, you know, a skunk can whip a bull, or a bulldog can whip a skunk, but it's not a fight worth fighting. And not paying your taxes is not a fight worth fighting, especially when it's about filthy lucre, when it's about money. And you can complain about it all you want, but you should always pay your taxes. Now, I wouldn't give them a red cent more than I had to. Not one red cent. But pay your taxes. Why? It's the law of the land. There's nowhere in the Bible. In fact, the Bible supports paying it. Romans says, tribute to whom tribute. I mean, you have to pay these things. You say, well, what if it gets so much it'll implode anyway? Like what's probably going to happen in this country. It'll implode, but it won't be you that does it. Okay? You're not allowed to. Why? Because we believe in authority. We believe in it. We believe in the levels of authority. We believe it in the home, in the workplace, in government, and in heaven. The world believes it, but they don't believe it. They don't believe that God has any right to say anything. A few of them do, but most of them don't. All right, look at Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2, look at verse 42. This talk about Jesus Christ. He was 12 years old. It says, and when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast, and when they had fulfilled the days as they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. They were thinking evidently he was with somebody else in the family. You know, they probably went down as a group, and maybe they had friends or cousins or whatever, and thought that he was with them. Well, it says that. But they supposed him to have been in the company, the whole group, when a day's journey, and they sought him among their kinfolk and acquaintance. And when they found him not, they turned back again to Jerusalem seeking him. All of a sudden, man, the kid's missing. What's happened, you know? He's been abducted? What's happened? I mean, you'd be worried sick. If you went a day's journey anywhere, man, it's like these parents that accidentally leave their kid at the rest stop. A couple hours later, you know, there's no noise from the back seat, and they go. I mean, how frantic you would be, how upset you would be, but it does happen. And what's sad is that some people have actually left their kid in the car during a hot day. I see how it could happen, especially if they're not used to doing it. Man, you want to make sure you've got a way of knowing that. Men are like that. You got to understand, we're such creatures of habit, and we only have one wave that runs in our brain. We can't think two tracks. We think one track. You heard of a one-track mind? Okay. So just kind of remember that the next time you trust your husband with the kids, that he's going to remember they're in the back seat. Just might want to give him a little reminder. And it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. That's kind of it's a bizarre thing. I mean, you don't normally would see this happen, but with him, he's different. And it says, and all that heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. And when they saw him, they were amazed. And the mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou thus dealt with us? You've been a bad boy. Thy father and I have sought thee sorrowing. Now she said the wrong thing there. And he said unto them, How is it that ye sought me? Wished ye not that I must be about my father's business? Now you've got to understand what he's doing. Joseph's a carpenter. He's talking to doctors about Scripture. He's making it clear. He says, I'm about my father's business. And this is his business right here. Even though he was a carpenter just by being the son of or the stepson of Joseph, he's making it clear. And they understood not the saying which he spake unto them. They didn't get it. It says, then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was subject unto them. Okay? The only reason I can think is at 12 years of age, there's that I don't know what they call it, a bar mitzvah type. I don't know, it's just a showing himself of who he is, making it clear. And then what does he do? What's right. He subjects himself to his parents from that point on till he's a grown man. But right there you find this little blip where he obeys God rather than men. He obeys God rather than his parents. I am sure that wasn't their wishes, and I'm sure he knew that. Would you agree with that? But God would rather have him do something else. And I think this was it was to give us a glimpse, and I don't know the full reason of it. I can't fathom it. But somehow we're getting a glimpse of him as a 12-year-old boy. And guess what? He knows exactly who he is and what he's there for. He's talking to doctors about the law. Okay, so we have an example there. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 18. First Samuel chapter 18, look at verse 1 there. It came to pass when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would let him go no more home to his father's house. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword, and to his bow, and to his girdle. And David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely. Here this is when you got the king or somebody in great authority actually against you, even though you're trying to do the right thing. Notice how David behaves himself wisely. Doesn't try to get himself in trouble. Doesn't get batting his gums about how he's against the income tax. He behaves himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people and also in the sight of Saul's servants. Everybody loved David except for Saul. And Saul was jealous of him. That was the problem. He was envious of him. They had a little tune that said, Saul had slain his thousands, but David his 10,000s. And immediately Saul got all green-eyed and goofy about it because they ascribed to David tens of thousands and only thousands to him. And sometimes, the green-eyed monster gets the best of folks and they go after somebody. In this case, it was the king of Israel going after David. And David had only done the right thing. He didn't make up the song. He got all mad at him. But look in chapter 19, verse 1 and 2. It says, and Saul spake to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. That's all the thanks he gets for winning all of Saul's battles against his enemies. And Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, saying, Saul my father seeketh to kill thee. Now therefore I pray thee, take heed to thyself until the morning, and abide in a secret place and hide thyself. And that's exactly what he does. And Jonathan is able to warn David. He says, you need to get out of here. He's after you. And he did that through, shooting a bow and an arrow and everything, all this. And right there you have where a son has disobeyed his father to do right. Now I can see that happen. I'm sure now I got a feeling that Jonathan was an adult at this age, but he's not only disobeying his father, he's disobeying the king. The only reason he's doing it is because he's obeying God. He knows that David is the next king of Israel. He knows he's been anointed the king of Israel. He knows that his father is, well, let's put it this way, it's going to be short-lived. How long he's going to be in office. So he does that. Again here, it's just obedience to God, not so much disobedience. Look at 1 Samuel 25. And now we're going to change over to wives disobeying their husbands. So make sure you write this down, ladies. No, I'm just kidding you. Just 1 Samuel 25, verse 3. Now the name of the man was Nabal, okay? And the name of his wife was Abigail, and she was a woman of good understanding. I don't know when she got it, but it wasn't when she married him. So it must have came along afterward. A woman of good, because it says about this guy, he's curlish. I mean, it's like the only time in the Bible when that word's used, curlish. Churlish? Is that what you, okay. Churlish? I thought it was curlish, but anyway. But I mean, it's a stingy, self-absorbed, a stingy individual. Churlish. And it says she's of beautiful countenance, but the man was churlish and evil in his doings. And he was of the house of Caleb. Might have been one of those arranged weddings, arranged marriages. Could have very well been, but she stuck with a real dud. Okay, and David's men are camped all around Nabal's property, and I'm talking about he owns quite a bit. He's got livestock and everything out there, and there's so many of David's men, they're like a wall to him. Well, during that time that they're a wall to him, no wild animals have been able to take any of Nabal's flock because of that wall. Yet David's men never touched his stuff. They didn't take anything from him. So there actually have been a benefit to him in the first place. So they thought maybe we could ask Nabal that he would help us. And they asked and said, could you help us out? We need food, we need provisions. And we've been a wall to you, we protect you. You're still going to be way ahead just because we're there. Can you help us out? And of course, I think it's Abigail that gets all the stuff together. Well, no. He says absolutely not. And almost like he's in seventh heaven. Well, let me read it here. Look at 14 to 18. Let's see. This is where, I'm sorry? 10? Yep. Let's see. No, that's about Saul, isn't it? I'm in the wrong chapter, I think. 25:10. Okay, I was looking at the wrong chapter here. No wonder I can't find it. It says, and Nabal answered David's servants and said, who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There be many servants nowadays that break away every man from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my flesh that I have killed for my shearers and give it unto men whom I know not whence they be? Well, he does know where they came from. He does know what they've been doing as a wall. He knows that they haven't taken anything from him. If these are nothing but a bunch of rebels, they probably killed him taking his stuff anyway, wouldn't they? Okay. So you can tell but look at verse 14. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to salute our master, and he railed on them. But the men were very good unto us, and we were not hurt, neither missed we anything, as long as we were conversant with them when we were in the fields. They were a wall unto us, both by night and day, all the while we were there. We were with them, keeping the sheep. Now therefore know and consider what thou wilt do, for evil is determined against our master and against all his household, for he is such a son of Belial that a man cannot speak to him. He's just unreasonable. So Abigail, knowing that her husband has turned them down for any provisions, you know what she does? She gets all the provisions together and takes them out to David, meets him in the way. They're on their way to not only kill Nabal, but also his seed. They're going to wipe him out. So, you want to treat us like that? You think you can defy us? I mean, we're being nice about this thing, but if you're going to stand there and rail on us, she disobeys her husband, goes out there and gives them the provisions. The funny thing is that when Nabal finds out, he turns like a stone. He's never right after. He dies. He is so churlish. He is so stingy that when he found out what she had done, he just dried up inside and died. So what are you doing there? Well, she not only saved his life, which really didn't last that long, but she saved her children's lives and probably her own life. So there are occasions. Now this last one, 1 Kings 13, and it's the whole chapter. And I'm going to have to kind of give a brief description of it. God wants to send a prophet to Jeroboam, and this young prophet, he tells him to go, and he says, this is what I want you to tell him. And this young prophet obeys God and goes and tells Jeroboam this thing, and he gets a bunch of acclimates because he did this. He obeyed God. And there's this old prophet that lives in the area, and he hasn't done anything for God in a long time. And God's kind of put him on a shelf. And the first thing he wants to do is get right up next to that young prophet. And God tells this young prophet, he said, now I want you to depart. I don't want you to go to the right or the left. I don't want you to stop. I don't want you to eat. I want you to just keep going. And this old prophet wants to rub elbows with him and, buddy, and really he's trying to take him down. So the old prophet tells him that, hey, the young prophet says, listen, God told me I'm not to stop, I'm not to tarry, I'm to keep going. And he says, well, an angel told me just not 5 minutes ago. And by the way, I'm related to Joseph Smith. An angel told me about 5 minutes ago that you need to come and have lunch with me because, man, we've got it all prepared and everything. And how rude that would be for you not to stop by and at least visit. And an angel just told me. You know what Paul warned about angels telling you a different gospel, right? Over there in Galatians. Well, in this case, he didn't obey God. He yielded. And it cost him his life. You say, what do we learn from that? Well, just because somebody has age on you, and just because they're older, and just because they're in the ministry, doesn't mean you got to believe everything they say. And it doesn't mean they're telling you the truth. There are countless men in the ministry that will tell you not to listen to this book right here. Countless. And you do well not to give heed to them. The moral of that story is there's no fool like an old fool, and this old fool you better not listen to. When it came to the truth, God had already told him what to do. The book had already spoken. And when the book has already spoken, doesn't matter what they say. Just obey God. See, it wasn't about disobedience, although that got him killed. It was just all he had to do was obey what he was told in the first place. Nobody could supersede what God had told him, especially an angel. We've already learned about angels, right? You got to watch out for them. So if you're going to disobey an authority, make certain you're obeying a higher one, or it is disobedience. And be prepared to pay the consequences for your actions, even if it's the right thing to do. That's why it's important. A lot of Christians, when faced with this dilemma, and I can see it, rather than obey God, they'll obey the authority that's, overshadowing them because they don't want to pay the price. I'm not telling you that. Pay the price. Obey God and pay the price. Just make sure it is of God what you're doing. In every case, in every example I've given you, it's obey God and don't worry about the fallout. I mean, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they didn't know. They didn't know what was going to fall out. Man, when they got thrown in that furnace, as far as they know, they were going to burn up like a crispy critter. But they found out the Lord was in that furnace with them. came out of that thing. Now, you probably won't have that kind of sign and wonder. God doesn't need you to come out of the furnace. I mean, he'd probably let you just get burned up. But I'll tell you what, that's a definite good way to go out. If you got to go out that way. Okay. You know what happened to the young man? What happened to him? A lion got him. A lion got him in the way. So, what did it say about the devil? He's a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. So we shouldn't be confused. When the Bible talks about authority, we shouldn't be confused about it. Always be obedient. And this is your highest authority, so this supersedes anything else. Doesn't matter who it is. Doesn't matter what they think doesn't even matter they think they've got more authority than this. They don't. Okay? Where it doesn't conflict with this, you're under them. And you're under the gun to obey. In fact, to disobey them is to disobey God. Why? All powers of God. They're ordained of God. The only time it supersedes is when they try to supersede this. Does that make sense to y'all? Not trying to confuse you about things. It kind of simplifies it if you ask me. I know how to deal with it after that. Okay. Probably some things I should have mentioned I didn't. There was one about when Jesus Christ was talking to those doctors. I've got a reference here in Isaiah. I want to look at that real quick, just and then I'm going to stop. Isaiah 7:14. Yeah, it says, therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son. Thou shalt call his name Emmanuel. Butter and honey shall he eat, that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child shall know to refuse the evil and to choose the good, the land that thou abhorrest shall be forsaken of both her kings. Yep, 14 through 16. It's just knowing to choose the good. You have all these authorities in your life, and if the problem with everything underneath this, it's fallible. It's just fallible. Government's fallible. Parents are fallible. Preachers are fallible. Pastors are fallible. The book's not. If you don't have an infallible book, well, you're going to be picking and choosing the authorities, and you're going to find yourself in trouble. Okay, we'll stop there. Any questions about it? Okay, let's take a break till about 5 after.